Uncle Clement, thanks for taking time to share some of your life stories with Katie and me today. And I'd really like to start in particular with your early life growing up on the family farm in Mecklenburg County, or out in the country as I used to call it growing up. What was it like?
We grew up on the farm and we knew what work was. We got up in the morning and went to work in the fields. Came home at lunch and drew water out of the wells and watered the horses and put them in the stables and fed them. We'd lay down and rest for a while at lunchtime. Then we'd go get the horses out of the stable, put the harnesses on them, take them back to the fields and plow or cultivate or plant till dark.
Well, what time did you generally get up in the mornings?
Probably 5:30, 6 o'clock.
Well, did the rooster crow?
Oh yeah, we had plenty of roosters.
They'd let you know when to get up.
Yeah. We had guineas too. They pot rack.
So you'd get up early and start your chores.
Yeah, we had to milk the cows and to feed the horses, and we'd bring the wood in at night, or Dad would, and Dad usually got up in the morning and made fires in the fireplaces, because that's the way we heated our house back then. We had wood stoves, and Mom cooked on wood stoves. She baked all of her bread, her cornbread, her biscuits, all of her cooking, frying ham in the morning for breakfast, eggs. And we had to take our crosscut saw down in the pasture and saw down pine trees and saw them in stove wood lint to fit in our cooking stove. And then we'd haul it up and split it with an axe and a wedge and a sledgehammer, piled up, let it dry out, and then that was what Mom used to do the cooking with.
Did she make many pies?
Yes, she made good pies. Mom was a good cook.
What was your favorite?
Well, I liked strawberry pie. Then she made these cross-cut pies. She put dough across each other. Uncle Sam Mullis used to come down there. That was Mom's sister's husband, Aunt Dora's husband. And he'd say, "Dora, why can't you make pies like Mame?"
Well, where did you go to school?
We went to school at Clear Creek till the 7th grade. We walked about a half a mile to catch a bus. In the wintertime, we'd build us a fire over there to keep warm till the bus got there. Then the 8th grade, I went to school at Bethel. That was in Cabarrus County. That's where Earl was going to school. They had kind of a controversy about the schools between Mecklenburg and Cabarrus County. So a lot of the guys and girls went to Cabarrus School if we could get a bus down there. Then I went back to Bain High School. It started off as Bain Academy back years and years ago, and it was changed to Bain School. I finished in 1940.
In 1940, you were 17 years old. Did you register with the military then, or did you start working?
I was working in Baltimore, Maryland at Glenn Martin Aircraft. I was a riveter. At that time, they never did give me a registration card. So I wrote the draft board, told them I hadn't received my draft classification. They sent me my induction papers. I had Earl's 36 Ford convertible up there. Earl had left it for us to drive. When I was at home, I said, "Mom, the next time you see me coming up the driveway, I'll probably be going in the service." I went in the service and I was in the Army, April of 43. They sent me to Fort Jackson for basic training. When we were inducted into service, I was sitting on one of the old bed that had springs in it. When I got up, it tore the seat of my pants. It was the only pair of pants I had. They let us go home for a weekend. While I was at home, Mom had to have a hysterectomy. And I went to see her, and she said, "I want you to come back to see me before you leave." And I said, "I will." We got back to the bus station trying to get a bus to go back to Fort Jackson, and we couldn't get a bus. We had to hire a taxi to take us back to Fort Jackson. We got back there about 4 o'clock, and Reveille was at 5. So we were cutting
Were you
it close.
stationed at different bases?
Well, I went from Fort Jackson to Denver, Colorado, Fitzsimmons Hospital after basic training at Camp Barkley, Texas. Then I went to Fort Lewis, Washington. While I was in Fort Lewis, I got a 15-day furlough. Took me 3.5 days to come, 3.5 days to go back, having 7 days at home. And when I got off of the train in Charlotte, I'd bought a new garrison cap to wear home. I wanted to look pretty good if I could. And I got off of the train and was walking across the street to the bus station, and a pigeon flew over and dropped a big glob on top of my cap, my new cap.
Oh, no.
Right. So got home and put my 7 days in, went to see a couple of girlfriends I had. Then I went back to Fort Lewis, and was shipped out to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey. If you're on the West Coast, they sent you to the East Coast. If you're on the East Coast, they usually sent you to the West Coast. So I guess I was fortunate being in the East Coast rather than going to the Pacific. So we sailed out of Camp Kilmer, New Jersey on the Queen Mary that they converted into a transport ship to transport service people with. It wasn't a convoy, we was on a ship because the other ships couldn't keep up with the Queen Mary speed-wise, so we ran a zigzag course across the North Atlantic. And we landed in Scotland, and then we moved on down into England. While we were in England, Germany was still sending those buzz bombs over there. They called them buzz bombs back then. I remember the day of the invasion, all the planes going over, the sky was just full of planes. And we knew that the invasion was taking place.
When did you cross the English Channel into France?
I think we went across 6 days after D-Day. And I can't remember where it was, Utah or Omaha. I was in the medical field. We was a supply depot, and we had to keep up with the Army to supply the field hospitals. We'd set up different locations and move on up by train or convoy.
Did you encounter any of the German prisoners?
I was a sergeant guard over a camp that had the German POWs. They had their own mess hall, mess kits and everything, and did their own cooking and everything. We'd have to circle a camp every night, every so often, check with the sentries to see if they were still awake, see if they would say who goes there.
Did you ever have any trouble with the prisoners?
No, never had a bit of trouble. They were like we were. They wasn't there because they wanted to be.
Did you stay with the Allied progression into France, or did you go in a different direction?
Well, we were not too far from the Belgian Balls when it happened.
So where were you when you heard that Germany had surrendered in May of 1945?
We were on up above Frankfurt. When we got our orders to come home, we had to go to Marseille, France, and wait. And it was a mud hole. I mean, it was mud, just tent city. Ships had got tied up. I think the longshoremen had gone on a strike. So we stayed down there about 3 or 4 weeks longer than we were supposed to.
I imagine you were anxious to get out of that mess.
Oh, man, because it was just mud, rain, and just plumb filthy, like a hogwash almost. But we finally got on the ship and came back through the Strait of Gibraltar and on up. It was pretty calm coming home, and we landed at Hampton Roads, Virginia. The USO had a good party for us that night when they come in. Had a dance and music and food. Then we got on the slow train from Norfolk to Fort Bragg. I mean, I thought we'd never get there. I think it stopped at every crossroads, taking on milk cans and stuff like that.
I can imagine it felt good to be on the way home.
Yeah, we were glad to get home.
What was your official date of discharge from the Army?
January the 16th, 1946.
How long were you in the service?
I was in there 33 months, I think it was. Earl had already got home from Japan and got well enough to where he came down in Fort Bragg and picked me up. He spent the night waiting for me to get my discharge. Earl had that 36 Ford convertible, still had it. Somewhere or another we got Joe, I believe it was. But anyway, the road into our house was so bad we had to park over at Uncle Phillips and walk through the woods to get home because the road was so bad we couldn't drive the car through there.
You just couldn't seem to escape that mud.
Yeah, So we walked around and went around to the back of the house, and we came in through the kitchen, kind of slipped in so Mom and Dad wouldn't hear us when they got in.
I imagine that was a big surprise for them when you walked in the back door.
Yeah. They didn't know exactly what time we would get back.
By the time that was happening, your brother John had already left home and joined the service, hadn't he?
He joined the Navy. Oh, and he spent most of his time in Hawaii. Then when he came back, he was at Fort Monroe, Virginia. Then he re-enlisted. Mom, that sure did break her heart when he re-enlisted.
Owen must have really liked Army life.
Well, I guess he did. Boy, they tried to get me to re-enlist. They tried to get everybody. I said, I want my ruptured duck. That was a little thing I sewed on you. I still got my Eisenhower jacket.
Well, after you got discharged from the Army, you were about 22 years old. So after farm life and Army life, how did you decide what to do next at such a young age?
As old saying, I kind of bounced around from pillar to post after I got out of the service. All the girls I'd ever known had already got married. Couldn't find a girlfriend. So I just traveled and sold snap-on tools for about a year out of the back of 39 Chevrolet. I was still at home with Mom and Dad. I wasn't married then. I'd go out Monday and come back Friday. I enjoyed it pretty much. I worked at Western Electric for a while. They first started me to tearing down transformers. Down in the basement, those transformers, they're full of oil and stuff. I mean, it was nasty. Then they moved me upstairs to rewinding transformers. And it was kind of a monotonous job. You'd sit there and the spinner would go around. You'd hold a wire and get it in the right position, beat it down with a hammer, make it good and tight. I didn't like that, so I quit that. I worked in a cotton mill, third shift one time for 7 nights. I said, that's not for me, so I quit that. Mom said, Rolling Stone gathers no moss. I said, well, I'm not looking to gather any. So Ernest Target was a friend of ours. He worked for Spanger Construction Company. So I talked to Ernest and decided, well, I believe I will go to work with you in the construction. He told me what I'd be doing, putting on door locks and stuff like that. So I went to work with Ernest at Spanger Construction Company. And we worked there in Charlotte. Then we got a job to build 2,100 apartments in Jacksonville, North Carolina, which was Tarawa Terrace for the Marines. We built that out and came back to Charlotte. We were living in a mobile home. All the key men with Spanger bought trailers. So we were living in a trailer park there in Charlotte, out on North Tryon Street. Lee Ford was vice president of Spangler, and he and Fred Taylor from Troy, which was Troy Lumber Company and millwork, they decided they'd come to Winston-Salem. They figured that Winston-Salem was going to be a growing city. Lee asked me if I'd come up here with him, and I told him, well, yeah, I guess so. So we moved up here, and we got in the trailer park. We had 2 cars, one she used to go to work and one I went to work in. We built a new house. We're going to get out of the trailer. We built a new house, and then they decided to quit the building business, and that was in 1955 or 56. There I was without a job. Colleen was working at Hennis Freight Lines. And I just getting some work where I could do a hang sheetrock or put up tile in bathrooms. I knew I'd do all that stuff. One day I said, I'm going to see if I can't go into business. I knew kind of how to get the financing because I'd worked through Wachovia Bank about VA and FHA loans. So I decided I'd try it. I went down to Dad. I said, Dad, I'd like to borrow $1,500 for me. He said, what you going to do? I said, I'm going to go into building business. He said, I don't know about that. He said, well, I'll let you have it. So he let me have the $1,500, and I had a little left because I just built that new house. And she was working, so I got a VA loan, and I built a house, $17,000. It sat there 7 months before I ever sold it. I thought, boy, if I get into it now. But I was picking up little jobs, so I struggled. I got the guy that used to deliver milk, and he said, I want you to build my house. So I got this one guy that I knew that was a good carpenter and another guy, and we went and built that first house for him, and people wanting a house built, we'd build it for them. You subcontract everything out, except my men were doing all the carpenter work, and you have your plumbers, your electricians, and your heating and air conditioning. Of course, when I started, nobody was putting air conditioning in the house at that time. But anyway, I fought it 10 hours a day, 6 days a week most of the time, then doing my material list and stuff at night and calling subcontractors early in the morning, some of them working out of the house like I did back then, because there wasn't any contractors in Winston-Salem, but 2 or 3 that did commercial work. So I kept on fighting, and I did it for about 28 years.
How many houses do you think you built?
Between 200 and 300, I guess. A couple of hundred apartments, small commercial buildings.
Did you partner with anybody else during your construction years for other projects?
Some of us would form a little get-together to buy land and develop it. In fact, we bought the Haynes farm out there at Clemens. It was about 500 acres, about 10 of us in on it. We developed the whole thing. I bought 10 acres of land out from the Haynes farm out there. It was zoned for apartments, but they wouldn't let me build but 42 units on the 10 acres. You could build 4 units to the acre because we didn't have sewer. You had to build septic tanks. So I went ahead and built 42 apartments. That was in 1977. People said, "You crazy." I hadn't even thought about being crazy, because I guess I wasn't even thinking. But anyway, I built those 42 apartments, and man, those things filled up. They said, "That's too far out. You won't ever rent all those." All of them 1 bedroom efficient apartments. Before I got one finished, I already rented to a single girl. She was a nurse.
At what point did you start collecting automobiles?
Well, I've always liked old automobiles. When we were in school, they had a guy from City Chevrolet that came out there and showed us how to do engines and stuff like that. The engine was pretty simple back then. So I could tear down an old Chevrolet and put rings and pistons and everything. In fact, I built the engine back in this Buick down there. This guy that did carpet work for me, he was an old car buff, and so I kind of got interested in it with him. And I built those three commercial buildings down there, and I sold 2 of them, and I just kept up. And I said, I was using it for a warehouse, and I said, well, I'm just going to see if I can tinker with some old cars. So I got into that and did that for about 15 years, and I enjoyed every bit of it.
How many cars did you have in your collection?
I had about 30 at one time, because of all stages, you know.
How did you come across all these cars during that time period? Were they hard to find?
Well, a lot of people wanting to sell a old car, they knew where I was, and they'd come and see if I wanted to buy it. This one guy had a 50 Buick Roadmaster, big one. It'd been used for a funeral home up in Mount Airy. And he came down there one day and wanted to know if I was interested in buying his Buick. I said, how much did you want for it? And he told me. I said, well, I couldn't pay you that. He said, well, I wouldn't take any less than that. I'd give it to Goodwill before I'd do that. A couple of days later, he come back and he said, now, what would you give me for it? And I told him what I'd give him. Well, I believe I'll just let you have it. So I bought it and kept it around there a few days, and there's 3 or 4 young guys that live up about Elkin or somewhere up in there. They came by there one day and was looking at that car. They just fell in love with it. Big old Roadmaster Buick, 50 model. It was big. Had them big wide white walls on it because they looked like they'd blow out any time. So these young guys, they bought the car from me, paid me cash for it. Well, they called me later on. I said, how's the Buick doing? He said, it's doing fine. I said, we drove to Atlanta last week. I said, did you have the same tires on it? He said, yeah, we didn't have any tire trouble. They went at night because it was hot weather, Said, the old car did good. They went to Atlanta and back in that.
Wow. Of all the cars in your collection, did you have one that was special that you would call your favorite?
This Buick I got was the best thing I found, as far as old, this car. Most one I bought was, I'd hear about them, or people would either come by down there and heard that somebody wanted to sell one and tell me about it. Maybe I go look at it and buy it or something. And
Did you ever run across any cars that people had stored in barns or lean-tos or just somewhere that weren't taken care of very well?
I bought one that was sitting on a lean-to shed, this 59 Ford. A friend of mine, his daddy had it. It was a good car. I mean, the body and everything was good, but I bought it and got it at a fair price, I thought. Well, I went up there to get it. Of course, I had to get the brakes unlocked. It all locked up on it and had it hauled back down to the shop. But the engine had stuck in that car and we couldn't get that engine unstuck. I soaked it all winter long in fluids that's supposed to break it loose. You could put a long pipe wrench on that flywheel down there and you could budge it. We finally pulled the motor out and we had to take a hammer and a 204 block and drive those pistons out of it.
What do you think caused that?
Well, it just set dampness. It was on the lean-to shed back where it didn't get any sun hardly. I had to pull that engine out and had it rebored and new piston and everything put in it.
Were you able to re-chrome your bumpers and trim and parts yourself?
You have to be a certain setup to re-chrome. I mean, that's expensive. Then the EPA got so tough on people doing that, so most of them had to go out of business because they couldn't come up to the standards.
Did you have to have many of your bumpers re-chromed and other trim parts?
Oh, yeah. All that stuff on that Buick's re-chrome, except the stainless steel, and you just polish it.
Did you take your cars out on the open road very often?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we drove all of them. In fact, we went to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, a car show. Colina drive one and I drive one. She drove a 59 Oldsmobile two-door hardtop up there, one of the great big steering wheel like that. Yeah. We'd stop on the road and spend the night.
It sounds like you had a real caravan going, causing quite a stir.
It was a lot of fun. You met a lot of nice people.
It does seem like it's a tight-knit community. I notice there's a lot of interest in old cars where we live out in California, too.
Well, the last wheel covers I sold for a 54 Cadillac went to California.
I remember that you and Aunt Colleen really liked to travel overseas. What were some of the countries that you visited?
Well, we went to Scandinavian countries, Hong Kong, Japan, China. China was a good trip. We were there when they declared martial law, '89.
At Tiananmen Square?
Yeah, wow. We were right there at Tiananmen Square in a hotel.
Did you encounter many of the student protesters while you were there?
Yeah, man, they had all these little three-wheel tractors, bicycles, and anything that had wheels on it. They were out riding those things. Sometimes we had to park the bus. We couldn't get through, and it was kind of scary at times. We didn't know what the heck was going to happen. In fact, we were there in the airport when held our plane up for Khrushchev to get out. I was kind of afraid of those planes they had over there. The old tires looked like those Chinese airplanes. The tires looked like it was ready to pop, because I think they got most of their stuff from Germany at that time. I went to Singapore. That's a nice place. In fact, the guy that put this pacemaker in is from Singapore.
Did he do that here in Winston-Salem?
Yeah.
Over at Forsyth Hospital?
Yeah.
You said you turned 90 in February, and you're still active, working in the yard and even playing golf on a few days. How are you feeling?
I feel like I should feel, I guess. And people say, well, you don't look like you're 90. I said, how are you supposed to look when you're 90? Do you know, Katie? I don't know, do you?
Do you think all your hard work and staying active, even to this very day, is contributing to your long and healthy life?
Well, you know, you look at Dad. He worked all his life. I'd go down on Sunday afternoon and spend Sunday night and come back Monday. That was during the last area that he's in. If the lawn hadn't been mowed, I'd mow it, and he'd, let me get a hold of that mower on and see how it feels. He'd get a hold of him.
That was after he was 100 years old.
Yeah. I spent the last night, just Dad and myself, in that house with him. And I had to take care of him all night. And the next morning, the EMS vehicle came there to take him to the hospital. He said, where are we going? I said, we're going up to the hospital. When we got up there, went in to check him in, the nurse came in there and said, Mr. Williams, how old are you? He said, I was born in 1890, you figure it out. Yeah, I'll never will forget that. He said, what am I doing here? I'm no good to anybody. All of my buddies are already gone. He talked like he was ready to go.
Clement, I really have enjoyed spending time with you here on your back porch on a beautiful sunny day in Winston-Salem. Do you think you're going to be like your dad and make it to 100?
Well, I hadn't even thought about it. You know, I think I've had a good trip. I'm just taking one day at a time.
Before we leave, we'd like to see your 1946 Buick. You may remember that we came up here some years ago and you took us for a ride.
Okay.
All right.
You got your camera?
Yeah.
I'll pull it out where you can get a good picture of it.
Oh, that's the speedometer. You think it needs some work?
Well, it doesn't work. I mean, it's not. Last time I drove it, it was flipping back and forth.
Katie, do you remember riding this almost 20 years ago?
Yeah, vaguely.
Back seat.
Uh-huh.
That's the top back. Yeah, I care some. Still got the pump.